A typical day would be to come into the morning, and we would have to get the webs or the rolls of the paper downstairs installed into the arms downstairs, and we would do what was called webbing up, which means that we would get the paper into the press all the way down to the folder. All the settings would have to be made. The job would be put into our computer, so the computer knows what size paper we're going to be running that day, what pages are in what position, and from there on the press would be filled up with the pages for that day, which would come from the plate making. Once the whole press is full of its pages, and we've got usually the front page would be the last one to go on, we would start the press up and do what was called a proof. So we would press the button to inch the press over, and when we were happy everything was just turning over as it should do, everything's in the right position, we could speed the press up slowly, and we would generally take it up to around about 30 CPH, which is copies per hour. We'd run a few hundred copies off, and then we'd press the stop button. The press would come to a stop. We would put it on its marks, which is a folder in a certain position, and we would put the stop in. We'd take some of the papers that we'd ran off, and we would go through the whole copy to make sure that all the pages ran concurrently, everything was in the right order, and we got ink where we should have ink, and etc. We would set ink then. We'd go through the whole paper. We could call up page 1 on here, and it would come up on page 1 on the computer. Page 1, for instance, would be here, and we can see from that front page, do we need to put more black and white, more black ink on here, or take some off, or put some more water on because it was marking up? And each of 8 zones that we would have along here would be lit up when we press the button for more ink or less ink, and we can control the amount of water we put on it as well, which will clean the copy up. Once we're happy with page 1, we would call up page 2, and we would turn over. Say, for instance, this was page 2. We could then set the ink here on page 2. We can put more ink on, take ink off, and we go through the whole paper. And after we were pretty satisfied that we'd made a bit of an improvement, we would then put the press onto crawl again, and from crawl we would start it up and probably do a second proof up. Again, we'd take it up to 30 CPH, copies per hour, and then we would kill the press, put it on its marks, and we'd go through the whole regime again. At the same time, say I was doing the black and white here, my colour man would be over there working on a colour panel. He would be doing the same thing with all the pages which had colour on. When he's happy that he's got a reasonable amount of ink on and it's looking pretty good, and I'm happy that my black and white's looking good and all my settings and adjustments are right, and that the copy looks compact and as it should do, we would then put it on crawl again, and we would let the press run at about 30,000 copies per hour again, and we would then be running outside to the folder, running back in, making quick adjustments here and there. And when we're happy that we've got a good enough copy to go to the public, I would give him the thumbs up, he would give me the thumbs up that his colour was okay, and we would press the start button, and that's good copies. He would then turn a switch out there, and the copies would start to go out and over and down to the publishing area. And we would then continue to make adjustments to the copy all the way through until we've got a pin-sharp copy with good registration, good colour and good black and white. They'd be going out into the vans downstairs, and we would then increase the speed of the press bit by bit until perhaps we were up to 42,000 copies per hour initially. And that would be the first run of the day, which was the lunch edition. I think we'd probably be printing something about 5,000 copies. We would have calculations. We would know, for instance, if we were running at 42,000 copies an hour, and if we wanted, say, 5,150 copies, we would know when to press the stop button, and we would know how long it took for the press to wind down and stop, and how many copies it would print during that winding down and stopping period. So hopefully we've printed probably just around about enough copies, so we haven't got enough, not too much waste afterwards. We'd look at probably having 20 or 30 copies over. Once they were happy down at the publishing area that they'd got enough copies and the vans had all gone outside, we would then put the press on its marks, as we called it, in a particular position, and then we could take the plates off that we knew we'd be using with new plates on for the next edition. And then it would be getting prepared for the next run, really, which would probably be the city edition, and it would go on and so forth, and we would do district editions. There'd be editions for Banbury, Leamington, South Warwickshire, Stratford, Bedworth, Nuneaton, Rugby, all over the place. There was all over our region of our part of the Midlands and Warwickshire. And that would carry on through the day. We would end up doing a city final run, which would be somewhere in the region of about 62,000 copies. And before each edition, all the new plates would go on, the new pages would be there, so we're up to date with the news. And that would carry on throughout the day until we finished the city final edition. After the city final edition had finished, we would then take all the plates off. We would be thinking about preparing for the night shift. And as the press was running 24 hours a day in the later years, we'd need to find out what the job was going to be next on. We'd probably be doing something for Ilkeston or Ripley or somewhere like that. We'd know what the page sizes were for those jobs, and we would have to then clean the press down from today's Telegraph run and get it ready for the evening's work. And different size reels would go in downstairs for different page sizes. And we'd have more plates to put on for the next job. The press would be set up, all the adjustments made. We'd wait for the plates to come on, and the whole process would start again. And this would carry on all the way through the night with a night crew, which was coming in, I think it was probably about 7:15 in the evening. We'd wash up and we'd go home, and the night shift would carry on from where we finished off. And we would probably meet up with them again in the morning, where we would start the whole process again with the Coventry Evening Telegraph. So it was a round-the-clock sort of operation in them days. Working for the Telegraph as a whole, it was a family, really, I suppose you have to say. And I think the vast majority of people that worked here, for the amount of years perhaps that I did, I was there for nearly 33 years, I think we felt that it was a family. It was, it had got a lot of warmth, you know, and we see each other from time to time, and we all greet each other, whether they're women from the offices or the wages, or whether it's our colleagues who worked in the engineers or some of the old printers. We're all friends, you know, it's great. And it was a great industry to be part of. I joined when I was 16, and I worked here until almost a 50-year-old. So it was a great career. It was a great place to work. Good camaraderie. I think I was briefly for a year as a trainee mechanic, but this was the first choice really at the end of the day. Started in the dispatch department as a 16-year-old and worked there for about 9 years until the opportunity came with an amalgamation between the two departments to work on the presses. Initially it was the old presses in the old shop, as we call it down there, which were 3 black and white Hoe Crabtree presses. And then this one, which is a French-built Goss Visa press, this done live colour. So that was pretty good. You could print colour at the same time as the black and white, whereas the old days we'd have to print the colour first of all on a reel and put the reel back into a black and white press and print the black ink around the colour. So this was quite up to date in its time. This is actually a forwarding station, and this used to be connected to here. So the papers would come out of the folder along the forwarding station, and it would go on a Ferrag system all the way over into the publishing area where they'd be stacked up. So this is the business end, and this is the big folder where all the papers come down, they're chopped up in the folder, and this is what you see on the newsreels, which is spinning around at a great speed, and the papers come out through there and go over the top and down to the publishing area. And this would have to be adjusted every day to the different size of the papers as well. This is the rear folder, and we'd use that in an emergency. If we got a problem with the front folder, we could always switch over to the back folder. It was a bit more antiquated, but it did work, and we've run that several times. This is one of the units. This is unit 2. This just prints the black and white part of the press. And I don't know whether you can see in there, but we have 2 massive banks of rollers, one that side and one that side. And they're all spinning round, and they're moving in all different directions to give us a good spread of ink. And the paper, the big rolls of paper, or the web as we call it, would come up there and it would go in between these cylinders over here, and this is where the printing would take place. We've got a water trough here, so we've got a mixture of ink and water. The water would wash off the parts of the plate that we didn't want ink on, and the ink would go into the other areas. So we needed a supply of both to give us a good copy. This is going up to the next level. This is the first level. And these are what we call the kites. And the roller above that is called an RTF, which is an abbreviation of roller top and former. So these are formers or kites. All the papers from all the different units would all be coming in here. It would be slit here, slit there, and they would come down and go through all these nip rollers down here until they'd go down to the folder, which is what we just looked at previously and below. And the whole press would be singing with noise, and it'd be very warm, and there'd be lots of ink spray all over the place, which manifested itself as a sort of like a dust and moisture. And you'd be breathing that in a lot of the time as well. All of the different units would be coupled together. Electrically, we could have the turn one in and turn one out, and they would all be connected down by this line shaft, which means that they all turn round at the same time to allow the printing process to take place. Well, yeah, I've spent a large part of my life in this room. I think we used to do something like a 13.25-hour night shift, believe it or not. And sometimes you'd be struggling to even get a little bit of a break, to tell you the truth. And myself and my grade one would probably be in there eating our sandwiches while we're running the press. There's a time schedule to keep, and we knew sometimes, particularly on a Wednesday night, when we was running a publication called the Citizen, which would take us around about 5.5 hours to run. If we had a breakdown during the night, for whatever reason, and we might be an hour or two behind, we'd have to keep running until the day crew come in, which would be long after the time when we should have gone home. And they might come straight onto the press and finish the Citizen off before they'd get ready to do the Telegraph. We never lost a publication. Sometimes we'd have to phone up Birmingham and say, we've had a breakdown, can you do 10,000 copies for us of whatever edition? And they would help out, and we'd send vans over to them, and they would print it, and our vans would bring the job back to Coventry. So it was non-stop, but it was hard work, but it was great. And like I say, good camaraderie. We all pulled together, and we always got the jobs out. This whole area over here was where we would store the reels. So the reels would come in by the big lorries, come down a lift, and our storeman with his truck would store all the reels in this area. Sometimes, and the reels, I don't know, the reels would be as wide as from here to that wall and that high, and they would be stored on their end. In actual fact, I think you can see the circle where one stood for a long time just there. And sometimes we would have them stacked 5 high. And believe me, you could push the top one like that from the top floor and you could see them move. But yeah, 5 high sometimes. So this whole area would be filled up with reels, all different sizes. There'd be full width reels, 3/4, halves, and then we do a very small one called a pup. And just inside here, this is where the reel stands were. Now the reel stands have been taken out, but there were 2 reel stands here. Far one would supply Unit 1. This one here would supply Unit 2. This would be 4A and 4B, and at the end it'd be Unit 5. And these would be, the reel stands were like arms, and you would have one reel in the arm which is running, and then you would have another reel behind it which you've got a preparation on with double-sided tape. The reel that was running would get smaller and smaller and smaller, and when it got to a certain size it would get triggered in by sensors that the next one would start to spin. And when both reels were running at exactly the same time and the outgoing reel had got just to the right length and it would be very, very small, a fly paster would come in smack. and you get a brush roller which would go over onto the preparation area which had got the double-sided tape on, and straight away underneath that the blades would come in. So you've got continuity of the run. So you've got the small reel going out and the new reel taking over. And once the new reel had taken over, the arms would move into position, and you would then load another reel into the arm behind that which had just been vacated. So the whole process can keep on running. But yeah, the reel stands have been taken out of here some time ago. I don't know where they've been. I would imagine where they've gone. They've probably been bought by another company which running the similar sort of a press, I suppose. And just round the corner here, this is where we had the big ink tanks. We've got the yellow, magenta, and the cyan, and you could hear the motors operating them and pumping the ink through all the way through to the press. Seems a shame to see it like it is now. This is the lift shaft, and this is where the reels of paper used to come in. And they come in from a lorry on the top floor, and they'd be rolled manually into the lift shaft. They come down, and then they get picked up by the storeman with his truck and taken into the storage area over there and stored up, ready for the next publication. And of course, it was down to the storeman to work out what jobs we got that week and how many different sizes of reels we'd need. And this, this is where the waste copies used to drop down. And right above us here is the area of the folder which we talked about a few minutes ago. Any copies which were scrap, we could throw a button and they would come down here and fill up some great big buckets down here. But it was frowned upon to have too much scrap. When we were running the press at speed, to save us from going outside the door into all the noise and getting a copy from out of the folder, we would have a check copy button, which was here. And you press that button and you could get a copy which would come out of the Ferrag system, and you could take that away and check the copy at whatever panel you were working on, whether it's the colour or the black and white. This is the colour panel. So the colour man would be working on this, and he would be setting ink the same way as what we do over there on the 8 zones. And he could call up cyan, magenta, yellow or black, and he could set each individual colour differently, plus or minus any amounts of ink within any of those zones. He can also move his registration. So he can call up any colour that he wants, and he can move the yellow up slightly, or he can move the cyan down slightly to the left or to the right. And you've got your registration marks here. So you make sure that everything fits on top of everything exactly. This is our old rest room. We didn't get much chance to rest, I have to say. But we'd have tables in here, and I think we had an old fridge over there in the corner. Normal posters that were put up over the place, taking the mickey out of each other. But that kept us going, quite honestly, all the mickey taking throughout the long night shifts, etc. But this is somewhere where we could come and sit and relax if we ever got 5 minutes, which wasn't very often. This is the plate making room. Once we'd obtained a negative, the negative would go onto a bed, the plate making machine. We'd press the buttons to activate it, and the negative would go along and it would lay on top of one of the plates that we put onto the press. So the negative would go on top of the plate, and then it would be exposed to light for a predetermined amount of time. Then the plate would come out of here and run along on these belts through these machines which had certain chemical solutions in, which would wash the coating off the top of the plate. The plate would then come into this machine here, which was a bender. It would actually bend the plates at the ends, so those bends then could locate onto the cylinders of the press. We would take the plate through our rest room, outside onto the press, and they would go onto the press until the press was full of plates, until we could start up and the whole process carries on. This is a plate which would have been on the press originally, so you can see this is, the press was made up of all of these. During the hot metal days, one plate would weigh 40 pounds. And with the system that we employed here on this press, you could actually take a whole press full of plates and put them under one arm and walk through and put them on the press yourself. This is the Ferrag area. You can see it says Ferrag up on there. And the papers would, from the press, come on a track through that hole in the wall and snake their way down until it came into, I believe there were 4 different stacking areas. And the papers would drop in 20s, and it would turn, another 20 would drop in, and it would turn. And say you were running a 64-page paper, you would probably have 100 in each parcel. So there would be 5 scores or 5 lots of 20. When it had made up its the right quantity, it would get pushed out of there onto a track. It would come down here on a track, and eventually it would find its way out through a door. And they would go down the track, through the hole in the door, I think it's locked, and go out to the van drivers who are waiting to stack them in, and off to the newsagents.